Not long after the Twilight Saga concluded, Summit Entertainment geared up for its next young adult franchise, Ender's Game. Based on the Orson Scott Card novel of the same name, Ender's Game was envisioned as the first in a series of new sci-fi films. After all, there's a ton of written material to draw from. But the series got canned long before its completion. Here's why we never got to see an Ender's Game sequel. Box office bomb. Hollywood is a business. People tend to forget that sometimes. Studio executives would love to make whatever movies they want, but they have to make sure they'll make their money back, and then some. So when Ender's Game grossed a mere $125.5 million worldwide, against a production budget of $110 million, that showed Lionsgate that audiences weren't willing to put up with an Ender's Game franchise. Variety called it one of the biggest box office bombs of the year. With that kind of response, few studios would be willing to jump onto a sequel. Boycott. There are countless reasons why a movie would flop at the box office, but for this particular film, an argument can be made that Orson Scott Card's views on homosexuality and the legalization of same-sex marriage led a number of people, especially those who are on the fence about seeing Ender's Game, to boycott the movie altogether. It's impossible to say how much of an impact the boycotts had on the movie's box office take, but there's no denying that in a politically charged climate, any negative press against a film like Ender's Game couldn't have helped. Budget constraints. Budget constraints are an ordinary occurrence in Hollywood, but it's almost never a good thing when it happens. For instance, 20th Century Fox kept the budget low for James Mangold's Logan because the director and Hugh Jackman wanted the film to be rated R. While that ended up working in their favor, a studio usually constrains a movie's budget if it doesn't seem like the film will be as successful as initially hoped. That rings true for the would-be Ender's Game sequel. The first movie had a production budget of $110 million, a fairly typical amount for a sci-fi flick, but the sequel might have seen that number dip below the $100 million mark. Director Gavin Hood originally wanted to film the first and second movies back-to-back, but Lionsgate wasn't up for that much of a gamble. Hood said, "It's a pity on many levels because that cast was all there. The sets are all there. We should have shot the two movies back-to-back." A tired trend. Before superhero movies fully took over Hollywood, each studio was attempting to launch its own young adult franchise to snag some of the success of Twilight, The Hunger Games, and Harry Potter. Some were successful, but most weren't. And at this point, young adult adaptations are a tired trend that audiences no longer seem interested in paying for. Beautiful Creatures flopped, as did The Mortal Instruments, and even initially successful YA franchises like the Divergent series suffered insanely diminishing returns. Young adult adaptations can be successful if budgets are kept low, and if the movies are marketed properly. Unfortunately, every studio wants to believe they're sitting on a gold mine, so they go full steam ahead with the first installment, which, in the case of Ender's Game, leaves little room for expansion in the sequel. Aged out. As Gavin Hood explained to Hyperbole, the proposed film sequel to Ender's Game would have been based on Ender's Shadow, which takes place concurrently with the first book. So if the studio really wanted to adapt that story, it would have made more sense to film back-to-back, as Gavin Hood originally wanted to. Several years have passed, and now Asa Butterfield and Hailee Steinfeld are far older than their preteen characters in the books. Butterfield has starred in several other young adult-oriented movies, such as Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children and The Space Between Us, while Steinfeld is branching out in movies like the Pitch Perfect series and The Edge of 17. It makes no sense to continue the series at this stage. Then there are the bigger actors like Harrison Ford, Ben Kingsley, and Viola Davis. With Ford returning to his iconic characters in recent years, he would be a difficult person to nail down for the young adult sequel. To get all these people together again would likely require more money than Lionsgate would be willing to cough up. TV spin-off. Even if Lionsgate and the cast were to consider a sequel, could the studio afford it? Hood made no secret about having difficulties obtaining enough money for Ender's Game. If he was having trouble getting $110 million in 2013, he's not going to be able to get enough money now. And remember, there are several novels continuing Ender's story, and even more in the Shadow and Formic War series. With so much material, the franchise could work better as a television series instead of a feature film franchise. Hey, it worked out pretty well for Game of Thrones. In fact, shortly after the movie released in theaters, Variety reported that the studio was considering a TV spin-off instead of a sequel. Since there were issues getting the necessary money for the first movie, and it didn't do so well at the box office, it makes sense for the studio to look at other options. Unfortunately, there haven't been any updates on the TV front since that report in 2013. So, who knows if it'll ever happen. Thanks for watching. Click the looper icon to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Plus, check out all this cool stuff we know you'll love too.